This is Books of Titans, the podcast dedicated to the influences of influencers. The books that have helped shape prominent inventors, business leaders, athletes, intellectuals, scientists, and others. We'll talk about what makes these books such classics and at least attempt to have an intelligent discussion about what makes them so important and influential. This episode will cover the book Poor Charlie's Almanack by Charlie Munger. And just a warning for everybody, unfortunately, when we recorded this episode, we're still a little bit baffled on exactly what happened, but somehow there were some significant audio issues that worked their way in, so I'm sorry that we've not been able to fix all of that in post-production. Did the best we could, but yeah, bear with us there, and next episode we should be able to resolve that issue once we figure out exactly what happened. But without further ado, let's get back to the pre-recorded episode. Poor Charlie's Almanack by, well, Charles Munger. You know, you might have heard of him. He's kind of a big deal. I bet you he does have mahogany bookcases. I don't know. That's something I'd like to ask him. Does he have that? It's interesting. You'd never know that the guy was that old. When you hear him give radio interviews and all that, and he podcasts and does everything else, I mean, you would have no idea how old this guy is. His voice is so young. He's 94. So irascible. He's so irascible. Just a fun guy. Anyway, I'm looking forward to this one. This was not one that I read. It's one that, maybe in the future I'll get to, but it's definitely one that Eric read. So we're doing that format this time around. And just a quick note, we have now set up a Patreon account that will allow you, if you are getting any value out of this podcast, if you get value out of this podcast, then we just ask that you return the favor and return us a little bit of value as well. Complete the cycle of grace, as it were, and just make a small donation via Patreon. You can do it on a per episode basis. You can do all sorts of things. I mean, I could borrow from Dan Carlin, the godfather of podcasting here, and say, $1 a show. It's all we ask. Actually, heck, 50 cents a show would be great. I don't know that we're quite worth what Dan Carlin is on those. So if he's worth $1 a show, I'm feeling pretty good about 50 cents a show right now. But if you're
is he the Godfather or the Podfather?
Oh, okay, 25 cents. No, really, I mean, if you're getting value out of the show, then finding some, that this gives you a way to return some value to us. So a little value for value proposition. Once again, you'll be able to find that Patreon via the booksoftitans.com website. And of course, as always, if you're not a subscriber to this podcast, you can subscribe through Apple Podcasts, which is of course a terrible podcast manager, or through other various podcatchers, podcast managers, such as Overcast, which is both of our preference due to a number of cool features, such as the smart speed thing, which as of right now has saved me countless hours. It does keep a count. Actually, I'm opening this up right now. I want to find out how many hours as of right now, because it shows you in the...
And Jason, what is the speed that you listen? Yeah.
Yeah, well, it depends on the podcast, but I listen to right around 2x on just about everything. Some podcasts will be a good bit more than that, some a little bit less, just because of depending on how fast the people tend to talk. But yeah, mine says smart speed has saved me an extra 143 hours beyond speed adjustments alone. That right there is worth it. But anyway, we're available through just about any podcast manager you could ask for. And also, if there's one of these episodes that you think would be interesting to a friend, please forward us on to that. So without any more of this shameless, I really am shameless about this. I'm not ashamed at all. Shameless self-promotion. We can go ahead and continue on to the episode. So tell us a little bit about Charlie Munger.
Yeah, Charlie Munger, he's best known as Warren Buffett's right-hand man. They met many years ago and have worked together since. It sounds like it's an amazing relationship, and it sounds like they're very similar. Whereas, with a Steve Jobs and who is the guy he worked with again?
Steve. You talk about Steve Wozniak?
Yeah, Wozniak.
Woz, baby.
Yeah, Woz. They were different, and Bill Gates and his counterpart, that both of them, they seem to be the opposites, and those opposites came together to create great things. Charlie and Warren seem to be pretty similar, and so this book is an obvious reference to Poor Richard's Almanack, which is what Ben Franklin would put out on a yearly basis. So this is kind of a take off of that, and Charlie loves Ben Franklin and talks about him quite often.
It was a painful loss when Ben died when Charlie was younger.
Yeah. 94. This is January 1st, 1924 is when he was born. So he's seen a lot. So Warren and Charlie, Charlie is the vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway. And so Berkshire Hathaway is the company that they're with, and what's sort of played a part in my life, where my first job out of college was with Russell Corporation, and Berkshire was the company that eventually bought them in 2006. So
a great investment, as we all know.
Yeah. As Russell is now pretty much only available in Walmart, and they don't do any sports teams hardly anymore.
High-end stuff.
High-end sports teams. So I wanted to share a little bit about this book. I'd always heard a lot about it, but never actually saw it. And so when I ordered it from Amazon and got it in the mail, I was quite shocked. And I'm going to show Jason what it looks like here, but it is an enormous book. I mean, it's probably 1.5 times the size of Tools of Titans, and it's easily 2 to 3 times the size of a regular book. It's over 500 pages, and it's printed pages, so colored pages, so they're very heavy. So just an overall enormous book. And
in word count, how does it compare to something like Tools of Titans?
Yeah, word count is a different thing. So I'll show you image of a page here, and what you see a lot is a lot of photos and a lot of sidebars. So
kind of a
content.
Children's picture book there, what you just showed me.
It is a picture book. And if he talks about somebody or he talks about a book, they'll highlight that person in the sidebar. And so you like Irving Stone, good literature, and then they tell about Irving Stone. They show a book by Irving Stone, and so this is throughout the book. The over 500 pages, the first 150 pages are kind of tidbits of wisdom, and they come both from Charlie and from people talking about Charlie. So things they've seen him things they've seen him do or say, and those are all compiled together in the first 150 pages. The final 350 pages are 11 different speeches that Charlie has made that are fully printed out. And so it's a unique set all around. What's that?
So transcripts, basically.
Yeah, transcripts of his speeches in full. And what was interesting and I guess odd is the 11th speech was, it kind of summarized everything in the book. So you almost could have just gone straight to that 11th speech, and so much of what he covers in the first 150 pages and then in the other speeches is contained in this final speech. So
pretty much, if you want to read this book, just read the final speech and thumb through the pictures, and you're pretty much good to go.
Yeah, but you're also out $60 if you do get the book. So that was one of the I put whenever I'm reading the books, I'm posting on Instagram what I'm reading, and the comment I most often got was is it worth it? Was the book worth the $60? That's quite a bit of money when compared to other books, and you can't find this book in the used section, and if it is, it's about the same price. There's different iterations or versions of the book. This is the expanded third edition.
I wonder if you can actually get the audio to those speeches somewhere.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I looked to see if it was available on iBooks. It's not. So it's really you buy the big book or you don't. And one of the comments I got on Instagram was a guy in Scandinavia. I can't recall if it was Norway or Sweden, but he said the book is nearly impossible to get there because it's just so expensive to ship it.
So that's why they're so happy in Scandinavia. Yeah. Now that the interesting thing about how this works is, of course, it is exactly what you would expect from someone who's running Berkshire Hathaway, right? Because they didn't exactly become multi-billionaires by giving stuff away for cheap or for free, right? So it's exactly how you would expect this to work.
Yeah, and so it's a fun setup. It's unique, but it's almost like a wisdom literature in a sense.
Several of the things we've read this year fit into that category, where it's just wisdom lit, basically, just modern.
Yeah, and a lot more wordy than say the Tao De Ching.
Yeah, or Book of Proverbs. Yeah, it's because most of these are wisdom literature without the poetic and highly dense structure of poetry that ancient wisdom tends to be transmitted in, partly because they didn't have the ability to print 500-page books with glossy pages and pictures and so on. So you better put this into poetic form and have something pithy that people can remember. So.
Yeah. And Charlie certainly does have some of those. He's known for his pithy comments, and there's a few I may hit on during this episode. So as for who suggested the book, it was suggested in a few different podcast episodes of the Tim Ferriss Show podcast. One was in the interview with Naval Ravikant. Another was Brene Brown. And then there was another podcast episode that included Josh Waitzkin, Ramit Sethi, and Adam Robinson. And
which, by the way, is a really good podcast episode, just for the record. Mm-hmm. That's one of the better ones.
This book popped up in that. So it's been recommended a lot on Tim's podcast, and I've heard it talked a lot about in different places, different podcasts. So it was good to finally dig into it. So
let's get to some of your favorite quotes here.
Okay.
So you'd mentioned, by the way, he's known for his aphorisms and his witticisms and all that. So I expect a lot out of this favorite quote section. I'm just saying. No pressure.
Well, yeah, there's okay. I've limited the quotes because I've got some of the other quotes in our nitty-gritty section. But real quick, first, an initial thought of the book. This was a very interesting book to read after we read Fooled by Randomness, because Taleb kind of took Buffett to task in the book.
For a couple things.
And one of the things Taleb said is that when you have all these investors in the world, just by pure chance, you're going to get somebody like Buffett that is above average in his investments. And
that's like 4 or 5 standard deviations outside the norm. Yeah. Yeah. And it may, and his thing is, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's that much better than anybody else. It could just be pure random chance that he's benefited from. And statistically, you'd expect that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's kind of a question when you go into reading this book by Charlie, and then and I guess thinking of Berkshire Hathaway in general and Warren Buffett, is, do they have some sort of a special sauce? Is their approach, and in the approach that Charlie highlights in this book, which is a very multidisciplinary approach to investing, does that give him an advantage? And it would seem so, but Munger himself acknowledges that if it were not for 15 or so specific investments that he and Buffett made, they would have had just average market returns. So 15 investments is all that set them apart. And granted, when they invest, they go all out. But 15 investments that they made that are what made them that rich.
Which to some degree kind of makes Taleb's point here, is if one of those goes the other way, what a difference that can make. Though I think actually, if you look at their strategy for investment, they follow a lot of Taleb's anti-fragile concepts in terms of making. They're big believers in you want to put yourself in position for big wins, but you've got to make sure that your losses are minimal. That you set it up so that your downside risk is always controlled, and that's something that they're big on, and that's something that Taleb in Fooled by Randomness is really, really big on. And in his other work, he talks about that as, that's a mark of really a smarter investor. So they do fit that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if Charlie, Taleb, and Kahneman walked into a bar, they'd be there for days.
I'd want to be in that bar.
They would, and that was the amazing thing is
if there was a deadlift bar in there, I know Taleb would at least have a way to get some of that pent up energy out of him before he punched one of them. Probably Munger.
I wrote Taleb and Kahneman in the margin multiple times in this book. So very similar thought pattern, and we'll get into it in the nitty gritty, but an entire section on psychology from Charlie, from a man who has never taken a psychology course. It's amazing how tied in those the thought processes are with Kahneman and Charlie. And this third edition was 2006, which is around the time that Kahneman's book came out. So Kahneman's name is never mentioned in this book, but the impact of behavioral economics is still very strong. Yeah. But it seems like Charlie came to a lot of this on his own as well. But I'm sure there was some cross pollination.
No, he and Buffett read religiously.
Yeah,
and they read widely, and they definitely are familiar with that explosion in behavioral economics in the from the say 70s to now. They've been keeping abreast of that. You can be sure about that, and a lot of that was published before Kahneman put it all together in his big book. I mean, Tversky and Kahneman stuff was getting out there first in the 60s. So I mean, it's been slowly building to the influential place that it is now, but they followed along. Yeah. So I'll get into a few quotes here. The first one is, "It's the work on your desk. Do well with what you already have, and more will come in." And I've seen this in my line of work. Whenever I get really anxious about getting new business in, or trying to get the next thing set up, it almost takes time away from just doing really well with the work I have in front of me. And I find that if I do really well on the work that's on my desk, that those people tell others, and it works out. But I thought that was a great quote and great way that he put it there. Second one is something about McDonald's, and I thought this was interesting, especially with how McDonald's gets a pretty bad rap now with health and all that. So, and the fact that they've gone away from animal fats as the basis for their fries, which they did under pressure in I guess it was the 80s or early 90s, and their fries have never been nearly as good since. And it's actually no healthier because animal fats aren't bad for you. But anyway, I digress.
Indeed, I've often made myself unpopular on elite college campuses pushing this reliability theme. What I say is that McDonald's is one of our most admirable institutions. Then, as a sign of shock come to surrounding faces, I explain that McDonald's, providing first jobs to millions of teenagers, many troubled, over the years has successfully taught most of them the one lesson they most need: to show up reliably for responsible work. Then I usually go on to say that if the elite campuses were as successful as McDonald's in teaching sensibly, we would have a better world.
You've just gotta love that. If our colleges were just more like McDonald's, then we would be better off. That is so Munger.
And it's pretty funny. Like when you read his speeches, some of his speeches would be to nonprofits, and he would just blast the nonprofits for how they handled money. And even in the speech, he would say, this is the last time I will ever be invited to a nonprofit. to give a speech, and that's kind of his style. Like he goes all in and says what's on his mind, and
yet they keep calling him back.
Yeah, because
he's still awesome.
He's awesome, and it really is that multidisciplinary thing. His whole mindset on things is to get the main idea from different fields, whether it's physics or psychology, mathematics, and get those first principles, get those main points, and make sure that he understands those completely, and then to use those when he's doing analysis on investment opportunities, businesses. So it's not just looking at a balance sheet and trying to understand a business. Like he's looking at leadership, he's looking at all different aspects of a company, and really trying to take it from a broad point of view. And so that was an interesting approach, and something you see how he does that in this book. Here's one of the quotes that I think you'll like. He says this multiple times, and if there's kids in the room, go ahead and put on earmuffs. He said, "What you don't want to be is the one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest." That's one of his favorites. So this is the final quote for this section, and before we get into nitty-gritty, and here it is. "To this day, I've never taken any course anywhere in chemistry, economics, psychology, or business." And it's pretty astounding. As you said, he and Warren are huge readers. I've heard as high as 80% of Warren Buffett's time is spent reading. And that's not 80% after work. That's 80% of his day. So that includes time at the office and everything. 80% of his time is spent reading. And it just goes into that lifelong learning. Charlie has always been into learning. He's always been into reading. He says his kids always remember him reading. He was always in his chair reading. And so, yeah, lifelong learner.
And not just learning, but broad learning. Mm-hmm. Focusing on getting a broad view of a lot of different arenas and avenues. I mean, he mentions, I never took a class in psychology, but he read a lot more in psychology than a lot of people who end up getting graduate degrees in psychology. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just the way that they've worked. So yeah, I think that in that sense, he and Buffett are testaments to the value, the continued value of being a polymath, of being focused on more than one thing, of being well-rounded intellectually. It's something that has, to some degree, gone out of fashion, or is going out of fashion among a lot of different circles, where higher ed is looked at as, or education is looked at as job training, as opposed to intellectual training and learning to evaluate and think and to think about things more broadly. We've moved more, like I said, to the job training aspect of things, and that if anything, they kind of are a testament to thinking about it a little differently, mm-hmm. and saying, no, this isn't. You should not be thinking about this as a job training thing, about education from, of a sixth grader, as about training that kid for a job, or even as a 12th grader, training for a job. No, jobs will come and they'll go, and you can be trained for what you need to do in a given job. But what you can't get by that, it's not important to be trained for a job nearly as much as it is to be educated and to learn to think clearly and to learn to think well. That's a different thing. And there's something of a testament to the value of focusing on that and learning to think carefully and critically, rather than focusing narrowly on, business or what, one or two things. Yeah.
Well, and learning how to learn. And that's one of the key.
The single most important lesson.
Yeah. And we've read some of the books we've read highlight going into a niche and just focusing on one thing and becoming really good at that, kind of to in looking at the jack of all trades, master of none in a negative light. But this book really puts forth that idea of being able to do multiple things and not lose anything with that, and in fact gain from that.
Yeah, it becomes a force multiplier if you do it right.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes to that 10,000 hour rule of, Jason, what you continually point out with that is that it is, what is it?
Deliberate practice.
Deliberate practice. And that's all Charlie is about, is deliberate learning. And not just, I mean, if he's going to learn about psychology, he's going in deep, but he's learning the basics too. He wants to get the basics down in every field and keep it simple in that sense, but be broad in that and approach things from a multidisciplinary point of view. So yeah, really neat in that aspect. And that you see that a lot in this book and how he does that in different situations.
So let's get a little bit more then into some of the details, some of the more specific things in this book. What are a couple of things that most stuck out to you that you think are worth the reader knowing, or worth the listener knowing as they're considering reading this book, or thinking about it after they've read it in the past and just wanting to refamiliarize with the book a little bit?
Yeah, I'll highlight a few and some that I think the listeners would, things that would really benefit them in how they approach different problems. And the first one is that Munger loves to invert problems. So he'll think through something in a forward fashion. You know, if I do this, this will happen. This, if we invest here, this will happen. Or if these things happen in the marketplace, you know, this will happen. But then he likes to do that thinking about them in reverse too. You know, what if this is the outcome that we want, what would have to happen for that to take place? If this is the outcome that we don't want to have happen, what would have to happen or not happen to have that take place? And so thinking things forward and in reverse is something that he takes into everything.
See, I think Elon Musk also, if I remember right, Elon Musk has also talked about how that's a practice that he also does. And again, this is one of those things I read. And so, you know, you can all, as Abraham Lincoln once said, you can never trust everything you can't trust everything on the internet. So, you know, I'm not sure that that's necessarily accurate, but I do vaguely remember Elon Musk talking about doing the same kind of mental practice.
Yeah. Well, another one here, incentives are superpowers. And he gives a few examples of different companies, FedEx being one of them, that was having trouble getting all the packages out in time. And so what would happen is they would hire people, and then these people would work at night. So all the packages was coming into a central location, and then they all had to be ready to be shipped out by the next morning. And they could never do it. The packages weren't getting ready in time, and you know, not everything was getting shipped out. And they just simply changed the incentive to where they said to the workers, they said, all right, when you guys are done with the packages, you can go home.
Huh. Yep.
And it flipped everything for FedEx. They started getting all the packages out, and just a simple, like, same people there, you know, they didn't fire everybody and get new people. Same people, just slightly switched the incentives, and huge changes in productivity and getting the job done. So
that actually gets me back to one of my hobby horses about education. I would completely, you know, if you gave me a stick to change the educational aspect of this, and I think we've talked about this a little bit on this show before, but if you gave me the chance to change our educational system, one of the first things I'd want to do is deal with that incentive issue. Because right now, if you're a kid in, say, the 5th grade, it doesn't matter how fast you learn. It doesn't matter what you learn. You're still going to be in that same room for that same amount of time every day for 180 school days per year. And then you're going to come back the next year and do the same thing. No matter how fast you learn, no matter how well you learn, you get no reward in that sense. You don't get to go home early. You don't get extra recess. You don't get You don't get to move ahead faster unless your parents really push for you to skip grades or something like that. And even that is socially difficult. So for me, finding a way to change that so that I would love to have to leverage the capacity we have now in terms of technology and the ability to assess progress in specific areas more easily on a granular fashion, by per student. That once a student shows mastery in a given area, that student moves ahead. And if you move past, and I would get rid of first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade. It's just a matter of skill level. And once you hit a given skill level in a certain subject, you just move to the next level. And maybe that's another instructor or something at the school or whatever. And you might be in the first level on one and the fifth level on another, but either way, you're moving up. And you get, you can have choices. If you finish everything for today, well, I've finished everything and I've shown the progress I need to today. So now I get to either go home early. I get to go to the gym. I get to do an X number of different things that I actually want to do, or I can choose to try to move ahead because I want to get out of here. I'm a sixth grade boy and I'm tired of being in school already. And I know if I push hard, and again, there's no grades at this point, but that age of kid, I know if I push hard, instead of taking 6 more years to finish, to get through 12th grade, I can do this in 2 or 3. I can finish faster. Why not? Now I can get out of here and I can get a job. I can go to college, or I can do it. If you change that incentive structure for these kids, especially for the males who are just stuck sitting in there and like, why am I even here? For whatever reason, males tend to have more of that wiring to go, screw this. I don't even know why I'm here. I'm not going to try. And that there is a male female education gap. Once the female students start moving up faster at certain age ranges, the boys will start noticing those girls are leaving them, and they're going to find ways to move up quicker too. I got to be up there in that same level with that girl. So again, you're playing with incentives. To me, that would totally change. It would be like the FedEx example, where you get the kids moving because I got the promise of getting out of here if I can finish this, whether that's getting out of here today or just getting out of school faster. Yeah, because we waste so much time now just basically doing everything on an hourly basis that you have to put in the hour, the butt has to be in the seat for that long. Why? Yeah. That's not the way jobs work anymore.
When it goes to the 10,000 hour, just 10,000 versus deliberate 10,000.
Yeah. And if we incentivize that, it changes things. Because right now, the majority of those students don't really feel like they have a real reason to work at this stuff.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
So this book, I would assume a lot of investors read this book just to get tidbits of wisdom from Charlie and his approach. And here's one thing that I found interesting. In discussing the common investment practice of purchasing index funds, he says, indexing can't work well forever if almost everybody turns to it, but it will work all right for a long time. And I know a lot of people are moving to investing in index funds. That's pretty much all I do. And so it was interesting to read that part, to read what he said about that. And it is that question of what's better to index, so to basically to buy a set of companies that and index against those as the market moves, you benefit from all those instead of just investing in one company per se. This mitigates some of the risk, and indexing overall has done a lot better than people trying to pick and choose stocks that they think are going to do well. But that's the question: is indexing always better than people picking out stocks, especially in the long run?
Well, once you get these massive market movers that basically are these massive institutional investors that are just billions and trillions of dollars into index funds, then it actually does become an interesting problem. Right, you can get there's too much money in index funds, then actually the market gets unhealthy, and that's where Munger, I think, is right. The question is the tipping point. Where does that happen? And it's not even about picking one stock versus indexes. It's a matter of what happens when these various institutional investors have 70% of the money in the market is in index funds. Well, then what? The money's just sitting, like there's not actually any dynamism in that market at that point. So we're getting pretty close to there now.
Yeah. So then the question becomes, what do you do instead? All right.
Rental property, man.
Yeah, rental property.
I mean, look at Berkshire Hathaway and how much property they own now.
Yep. So the last thing I wanted to highlight is the thing that I thought was the most beneficial piece of info I got from the book, and well worth the $60 price. Munger talks about Warren Buffett's hypothetical idea that young investors should be given a card with 20 slots on it, and every time you make an investment, one slot is punched. Once you reach those 20 investments, there's no more investments. And what Buffett says this would do is it would really make people think about what they're investing in. And, you think back to what I said earlier about Charlie saying that their success has come down to 15 really good investments. What if you really had to think through deeply what you were going to invest in over your whole life? What if you only invest in 20 things? It would really make you slow down and think about what you're investing in, maybe take a little extra time. And I really liked that approach. I in college, I opened up a stock account and basically lost all that money just from not thinking through things and investing quickly. And in fact, I even sold some of the stocks that if I had held on to those, they would have been a lot better. So that idea of having just 20 investments opportunities in your lifetime, I thought that was a really smart thing and a smart way to look at investing.
I wonder if he actually got that idea from old from the old dances. From basically when you would go to a dance, you'd have dance cards where you basically you would keep track of the people, like, may I have this next dance, right? There was actually a name, like you would have your card and you fill in like this dance I'm dancing with this person, this dance I'm dancing.
Oh, really?
And I wonder if that goes back to, that era, because they're old enough that they actually were around when you went to a formal dance, like a school dance or something, you had a dance card.
Yeah.
And it sounds an awful lot like a typical dance card that basically saying, keep a dance card of your investments.
Yeah. That's funny.
It's a fascinating idea, though.
Yeah.
And again, I think that the key there is that he's saying focus on the quality of the investments, not on the quantity. Because if you don't get the quality, the quantity is going to kill you.
Yeah.
And again, that's a very Talebian point. That if you're not paying very, very close attention to the risks, if you don't know exactly what you're getting into, and if you haven't considered all of the potential downside there, you're going to get killed.
Yeah. And I think the other side of it is speed. Don't be in a rush.
Easy, and it's funny to say when you're 94. Yeah. But yeah.
But I mean, in investing, like you hear about what you think is a good idea or a good deal, and you're like, well, I got to get in this right now. And their point is no, like take your time, invest well, invest wisely. And if it helps you to think about it in that way of just having 20 opportunities in your lifetime, maybe that'll slow you down to not rush into something that you think is a good idea at the time. So I'm ready to close this one up.
All right. Well, it's a little bit shorter episode for us, but what would you say in terms of conclusions? What were your big takeaways here for the person considering reading this book, or at least the last speech of this book, what really did you gain from this book? Where would you put this book in terms of the company that in terms of ranking it relative to some of the other things we've talked about on this podcast, and in terms of the other options out there? Is it worth it?
I'm kind of mixed on it. I mean, it was an enjoyable book, but I didn't rank it very highly compared to some of the other books that we've read this year. I mean, it's a great. I mean, if you're an investor and this is your book. I mean, this is really good wisdom, advice, and it's broad. I mean, he hit one of his speeches is on psychology, so he's hitting on a lot of different topics, and then it's just a broad range in terms of the books he references. There's a lot of book recommendations in the book, so yeah, it's a very interesting book. It's full of wisdom, and it's from a guy who loves learning. So that comes across in the pages, and it kind of encourages you to want to learn more. My critique, though, is that there is a lot of repeating in the book, and it just comes about because he uses some of the same examples in a lot of his different speeches, and then people have also highlighted those in those first 150 pages where they're talking about Charlie. So a lot of repeating, but overall, a good, interesting book that people would get a lot out of. The $60 price tag scares a lot of people, and in that sense, I think some of the other books we have read this year are a lot better. And for those, I would say Thinking Fast and Slow, Fooled by Randomness, and even the Tao Te Ching, where this is a book full of wisdom, but the Tao Te Ching is, I mean, you can get through it in an hour and a half, whereas this Poor Charlie's Almanack, it took me many days to get through this book. And Tao Te Ching presents the concepts in a very simple form. It might be a sentence or 2 lines of content, and
that forces you to reflect on it rather than having someone else having reflected on it for you, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So yeah, a lot of books that we've read this year that I would recommend over this one, but it is an interesting one, and it's one that not a lot of people are going to read just because of the price tag and the length of it. So
what you'd basically say then, if I'm going to put words in your mouth here, is you wouldn't necessarily recommend it over some of the others, but you certainly don't regret having read it.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
And I covered just a very few of the takeaways I got from the book. So there are a lot of really nice pieces of wisdom and stories and book recommendations and everything that I know will stick with me into the future. So for that, the back to that question I kept getting on Instagram, was it worth it? I mean, when you think about the price of a book and what you're gaining, and if one idea can help you in your business or in your life, I mean, a $10 book, that's a no-brainer investment. A $60 book, still, it should be a no-brainer. I mean, if one of these ideas from this book helps you even in an investment, that $60 will be recouped rather quickly. So,
yeah, makes sense. All right, well, that'll do it for us here on Books of Titans. Once again, you can follow along with us on booksoftitans.com, where there's additional material related to this podcast, including Eric's written reviews of the books that he's covered. I have been negligent and have not done that written portion, as I'm working on finishing my own book and several other projects, so I have other fish to fry at the moment. But
all books ever suggested, most gifted, or discussed on every single one of the Tim Ferriss Show podcast episodes. So if you're looking for good books to read, I update that the moment the new podcasts come out from Tim. So some great book recommendations there.
Yeah, so follow along with us there. You can also follow along on Instagram, Twitter, all sorts of different social media options. Make sure to tell a friend if there's something in any one of these episodes that you found valuable. And don't forget that we're putting that Patreon account up. It's going to be going live late this week around the time that this episode posts. So if you've gotten value from this podcast, please do us a favor and return some value in return. Like I said, maybe we're not worth what Dan Carlin is, but 50 cents a show, and we'll still appreciate it. Once again, this has been the Books of Titans podcast. I'm Jason Staples. That's Eric Rostad. Keep reading, keep listening, and keep improving.
And keep it real.
I made this.